ho, ho! Taxi!
Hey everybody, welcome back to My Pinball Machine Collection, Part 12. If you've been following along so far, back in October of 2009, I decided to shoot some small segments on each of my individual pinball machines. Well, unfortunately, there were a handful I couldn't get to, and so here we are in September of 2010, almost 10, 11 months later, shooting the final segments. I can't think of a better game to start this home stretch than the one I have sitting right here to my right, which is Taxi. This is the game that is the most nostalgic to me. This is the game that tugs at the heartstrings more than any of the other games in my collection. Now, I have been asked many times, if you had to sell off every single game, what is the last game you would part with? This is it. This segment might be a little longer than the others. I got a lot to say, so we better start right now. Let's begin with really what Taxi is, and that is a pinball machine released by Williams in 1988. Now keep in mind that in 1988, pinball was really in its upswing, okay, to about 1992 when it hit its peak, and Taxi was sort of during the rise of that. The game did sell pretty well for its time. Taxi showed up in 1988 at a place called Putt Putt Golf and Games, which for me personally was my second home. And to be honest with you, Taxi is the game that cemented my pinball addiction. The rules of Taxi are this: you are the taxi driver, and hopefully a lot more attractive than the taxi driver on the back glass. At least I hope that I am. Right? Anyway, there are some really strange characters that you as the taxi driver have to pick up. And if you take a look here on the playfield, that is essentially your goal, to pick up the 5 passengers. Over here on the right, we have Pinbot, and to pick him up, you knock down these 3 targets. To get Marilyn Monroe, you knock down these 3 targets. To pick up Dracula, you have to shoot this scoop. To pick up Santa Claus, you shoot straight up the left side into this hole. And to pick up Gorbachev, you shoot up around this loop. Once you pick up all 5 passengers, you light the jackpot, which is sitting right here in the Gorby shot. Now, I know it sounds easy, and it really does, but here's the problem. Only 2 characters are lit at a time. As you pick one up, then the next one's lit, and the next one's lit. That's not too bad, but here's the other problem. You have to pick them all up in one ball. If you drain, they reset. Now, there is a carry passengers target right up here in the corner. If you can light that, you will carry passengers to the next ball, but it's in such a funky little place, it almost happens accidentally. You'll pick up 1 passenger, you'll pick up 2 passengers, all of a sudden you'll light the jackpot and you'll drain and you'll get so mad, your adrenaline will be rushing, but you just won't do it. And that, to me, is what makes Taxi so awesome. And I have seen many people who have come over and played this game and got just as hooked on it as I have over the years, because it's very simple to learn. And it's that adrenaline rush you get when you almost get the jackpot. Now, there are other things. When you shoot the ball, it goes up into this spin out, and your goal is to spin it just right so it lands on 100,000 here. A lot of times it'll just reset back to 1,000 and you'll feel like crap. Trust me, it happens a lot. You have the cab lanes up here, which obviously move your multiplier up. Now, you also have your bumpers up here in a cluster of 3, very, very typical. But you also have 2 ramps, and if you notice, they crisscross. Crisscross ramps are a staple of a Mark Ritchie game. In fact, if you take a look here on the taxi cab, heading up the plunger lane, I have Mark Ritchie's autograph on here. If you continue to crisscross these ramps, you move up these airport rides, and eventually you'll light up the million shot, which is right up here in the Santa Claus scoop. And that million, actually, during this time, is actually a pretty lucrative shot. You also have a lock up here in the express lane 1. If you lock 1 and then release 2, you'll get 2-ball multi-ball. If you can lock both of them again, you'll get airport ride bonuses, and you'll get literally a ton of points for each ramp shot. There is a catapult here. It's one of the earlier ones that used it, and it's right here in the Dracula scoop. Also, the game has a bell inside that rings, and it's pretty loud at home.
To the airport.
And one other thing, there is a mystery shot right up here. In the Joyride, it's called the Joyride. You've got the yellow cabinet, which looks really great. The topper here that actually lights up and flashes with the game and says taxi, just like the ones you'd find on a regular taxi cab. And over here, this meter right here, this meter bonus, this actually counts down as you play, and your bonus is actually tallied. And if you look up, it looks like the taxi cab meters that they used to have. The music, for some reason, is really awesome. I can't explain what kind of music it is, but it fits the theme perfect, and it's always been a track that I loved, and I love the voices. And it just fits perfectly. And once you pick up a passenger, there's like a little jingle. Gorbachev, which is my favorite. Hey! It's funny, I remember all of my friends would play Taxi, and whenever any of us got Gorbachev, we'd always say, hey, right after we heard the music. Hey! And it seems like it's still happening today. At my pinball parties, for example, people will be sitting around at a table and they'll be talking like, hey Bill, did you see that new movie? Hey, that came out last week. And it just, it's infectious, it's addicting. I'm not sure why, but it still happens. So this game shows up at putt-putt golfing games. I get completely addicted to the whole concept of picking up the passengers. I'm not that good at pinball yet, so I really hardly ever get the jackpot if I even get close to it. If the game busted or wasn't working, I used to call putt-putt golfing games like crazy and ask if the game was working. I'd say, hey Jack, this is Chris. Is Taxi working? No? Okay. Hey Jack, this is Chris. Is Taxi working? I know it's only been an hour, but is Taxi working? Okay. And probably drove him crazy. So now I'm playing Taxi for a long time at putt-putt golfing games, and what happens? It leaves, but I end up finding it later at a bowling alley not too far away, and I'm playing it there. It leaves. Later on I would find it at a couple of other places. And so fast forward to 1993. Yours truly is 16 years old, and he is saying to himself, you know what, I want to have my own machine. I don't know if I can, but I'm gonna try. And I saved up money for a long time, and I made a phone call to a local operator because at that time, that's the only way I knew how to pick one up. And wouldn't you know, they had a taxi they were willing to sell. Of course, I asked for that one first. The same taxi I used to play at the bowling alley. It's the second taxi I played like crazy at the bowling alley. Now at this point, it's obviously a lot more beat up. It has a lot more problems, a lot more spit and duct tape, if you know what I'm saying. But it didn't matter. We stuffed it in the corner of my bedroom, and there it was, my very own taxi. I got like 5 or 6 service calls for free at the time, and when the guys would come up and they'd fix the game when something went wrong, and trust me, things did go wrong with this one, I would sort of set up my camera and I would listen to them as they were talking, and I would really try to soak up what they were saying because I found it very interesting. So if you watched my very first episode of this, I talked about Addams Family was the second game that I got, and I had it the longest. Taxi was the first game that I got. But the only reason I haven't had it the longest is because I ended up selling that first Taxi 5 years later when it was really starting to act up. And I guess I was kind of hoping I could find a nicer one in the future. This game was way too important to me, and I knew somewhere was going to be a nice Taxi. Every year, there's a convention in Chicago called Pinball Expo. This is considered the one that everyone should go to. It's where all the designers go, and it's in the home world of pinball, and that is Chicago. Every year, Williams used to donate a row of games for the tournament that they would have there, and in 1988, they donated Taxi. What this machine is, okay, is one of the tournament games that was at Pinball Expo 1988. In fact, if you take a look under the lockdown bar here is a piece of masking tape which I left intact. It's a little rubbed off and hard to read, but it actually says show game. The guy who ended up winning the tournament didn't want the game, and he ended up trading it for something else, and that's how this guy David ended up getting it. He had it in his house for a little while, and then he folded it up and he put it in storage. And it was there for a long time until you-know-who somehow got in touch with this guy, and this was about, 4 years after I sold my other one. I ended up with this Taxi. I've never seen a playfield in this kind of shape for a Taxi without black discoloration everywhere. and to be honest with you, I knew this was the game that was going to stay. And so I spent more time restoring this game than I ever will spend on anything else, but it was worth it. I pulled the Mylar up, I pulled everything off the top, everything off the bottom, and I sent the Playfield out. The guy who did it for me touched it up a little bit, and he put clear coat on the whole thing to protect it. The last piece of the puzzle to complete the restoration on this game was a brand new translite. Taxi translites are actually kind of hard to find. You can find them, but not necessarily Marilyn Monroe ones. Now, this is a little bit of trivia that we haven't touched on yet, and that is there are two versions of Taxi out there. There is the Marilyn version, and there is another version called the Lola version. Now, what happened was they used Marilyn Monroe's likeness. Well, the Monroe estate found out about it and sent them a letter saying, hey, if you're going to use Marilyn Monroe's likeness, you're going to have to pay us some mucho dinero. Comprendo? So I guess to avoid any legal problems and to have to pay any more money than they needed to, they decided to change the game in production. They took her hair and they made her brown. They made her brown here on the playfield, and they changed the name in the software to Lola. So therefore Marilyn was completely removed from the game. Now, the amount of Marilyns versus Lolas, you know what? It differs based on who you talk to. A lot of people say the Marilyn ones are rare. I'm not really sure if they are. I have seen just as many Marilyns out there as I have seen Lolas on location, at conventions, whatever. It's not a 50-50 split. There are probably less Marilyns than Lola, but I found Marilyns at all the arcades I played it at, except for one. If you look here, this taxi has a Lola character on it, and I remember thinking to myself, wait, I had found Marilyn twice before, but what's this? What's Lola? I never understood what happened. This is an NOS translite, and there you have it. So I'm very happy to not only have a taxi that's in amazing condition, but also have one of the Marilyns, the ones that I played for the most part as a kid, and kind of the first that were created. So that's my long rambling story on Taxi. It is such a nostalgic game for me that, to be honest with you, I could probably fill an hour to an hour and a half of these videos with the nostalgia and the history. But I think this gives you an idea why this would be the last game that I sell, regardless of value, regardless of anything other than how much it means to me. So, thanks for joining me for My Pinball Machine Collection. I will see you on the next one.